Darius walked into the wrong restaurant. He just didn't know it yet. He pulled out a chair for her, laughing, comfortable, completely unaware. Then Renee appeared at the table. His whole body went still. She set down 2 menus, smiled without blinking, and said, "Enjoy your meal, sir." The room stopped breathing. Stay with this one, because what happened inside that restaurant that evening was not just about a husband and a wife. It was about what a woman does when she realizes the people she fed, with her hands, with her heart, with everything she had, were the very ones planning to leave her with nothing. The restaurant was called Soulful, and every single person inside that dining room on that Friday evening knew exactly whose name was on the deed, whose hands had painted the walls, and whose grandmother's recipes were printed on every page of every menu stacked near the entrance. The name above the door was not a brand someone had designed. It was a name that had come from a woman sitting in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, looking at what her life had added up to and deciding it was worth sharing. It was Renee's name. It had always been Renee's name. Darius came in around 7:15, blazer buttoned, cologne arriving 3 full steps ahead of him. He held the door open for the woman at his side the way a man holds a door when he wants the room to notice. With a particular ease, a studied nonchalance, the gesture of someone performing comfort rather than feeling it. The woman was tall and composed and wearing a dress the color of red wine, and she smiled the kind of smile that belongs to someone who does not yet know what room she has walked into. The hostess was a young woman named Kezia, who had worked at Soulful since the 2nd month it opened. She had arrived at 22 with a spiral notebook full of questions about the restaurant business, and Renee had hired her on the spot because Renee understood that kind of hunger. Kezia looked up from the reservation stand when the door opened, registered who was walking in, and went completely still. Not the still of shock, the still of a person who sees something clearly and has to make an immediate decision about what to do with what they see. She looked toward the back hallway. She looked at the server nearest the bar, a tall man named Otis, who had been at Soulful since year 1. A full conversation passed between them in the space of 2 seconds, and no words. Darius did not notice. He was already moving toward table 9, the window seat, the one with the softest afternoon light and the best view of the street below, the table he had eaten at many times, always with the ease of a man who believed he had some claim on whatever room he occupied. He pulled out the chair for the woman in red. She sat. He laughed at something she said, his head tilting back slightly, one hand resting briefly on her shoulder. He picked up the table number card and turned it between his fingers absently. And that was when Renee walked out. She came from the back hallway the way she always did. No rush, no announcement, just that measured walk of hers that had always carried something in it the room couldn't quite name. She was in dark slacks and a cream blouse. Her hair was pulled back, her hands were at her sides. She carried nothing and needed nothing. She moved through the dining room the way someone moves through a space that is entirely theirs, which was because it was. She walked toward table 9. The server nearest the bar found something on the floor that required his full attention. Kezia turned to her reservation book and did not look up. 3 guests at table 6, a couple and another woman who had been mid-conversation, dropped their voices simultaneously and turned fractionally toward the window table. Someone near the bar set down a glass. Renee reached the table. Darius looked up. 3 seconds, maybe 4. His whole body stilled like a system that had just received a signal it did not have, a protocol to process. His hands were on the table. His shoulders did not move. His chest did not rise. He looked at Renee the way a man looks at something he had calculated, and found that his calculation had been wrong in a very fundamental way. Renee looked at him, then at the woman, then back at him. Her face held the same expression it had held walking across the room, open, unhurried, carrying something behind it that no one in that restaurant could quite name or reach. She reached across the table and set down 2 leather-bound menus with the quiet precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She stood straight. She looked directly at Darius. She smiled. Not a performance smile, not a tight one, not the smile of someone containing something about to overflow. Just a smile that sat still on her face and was completely in control of itself. "Enjoy your meal, sir." Her voice was low and even, exactly as it always was, exactly as it had been when she greeted the very first customers who ever walked through her door 7 years ago with $4,000 behind her and her grandmother's handwriting in her pocket. She held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she turned and walked back toward the kitchen without looking back. Once. Not a pause, not a hesitation, not a single backward glance. The dining room breathed again, slowly, the way a room breathes after something has passed through it. Near the entrance, pinned to the wooden frame just beside the host stand, where it had been since the first day Soulful opened, was a small laminated card. The writing on it was faded at the edges and looped and unhurried, done in the hand of a woman who had been gone for 6 years. It was a recipe, not a printed one, handwritten on a piece of lined paper torn from a spiral notebook in blue ink that had dried into a slightly lighter shade over the years. A woman named Viola had written it out at her kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon because her granddaughter had asked her to, because her granddaughter had a plan, because her granddaughter had always believed, even at 22 with $4,000 and a rented notebook, that something built with your own hands could not truly be taken from you. Renee's fingers brushed the card as she passed, just barely, the way you touch something that has become part of the architecture of your daily life, not because you are thinking about it, but because your body already knows it is there. She didn't walk away because she was weak. She walked away because she had already won. He just didn't know it yet. There was a version of Darius that Renee had loved without reservation or calculation. She had met him 8 years ago at a community fundraiser held in the gymnasium of a church on the west side of the city. Folding chairs and steam trays, and somebody's uncle playing gospel-inflected keyboard in the corner, the kind of event where everything smells like soul food and someone is always having a better time than expected. Darius had come in looking like a man who did not belong in folding chair rooms, but he had moved through the space without any of the condescension that might have accompanied that kind of ease. He had introduced himself twice, as if the first time had not quite taken. He had remembered her name immediately. He had asked about the notebook she was carrying. She had been writing in it between plates, sketching something. And when she told him it was a restaurant she was going to open, he had not given her the polite smile people gave when they were humoring an idea they privately doubted. He had leaned in. He had said, "Tell me more." She had thought she was being seen. The restaurant existed in that notebook before it had a building or a stove or a name. It was tables and menus, and her grandmother Viola's recipes written out in columns, organized by season, the way Viola had always cooked. Not by recipe category, but by what the air outside told you to make. Renee had $4,000 in savings that had taken her 2 years to accumulate on a social services salary. She had a name, Soulful. She had the recipe card her grandmother had pressed into her palm the last time she visited, 6 weeks before Viola passed, which was also 6 weeks before Renee had stopped treating the restaurant as a dream and started treating it as a schedule. Darius liked the idea. He told it at dinner parties the way people tell things that are close enough to theirs to carry. "My wife is building a restaurant." He said it with pride that was real enough to pass. He came to the opening. He stood in the photographs. He held her hand when the first review was published. The first crack appeared in year 2. Soulful had been open 11 months and was doing better than anyone had projected. The loan officer who had sat across from Renee with that particular quality of doubt that comes from looking at a black woman with a business plan and deciding the odds without quite examining the person. That loan officer had been wrong in every direction. The restaurant was not merely surviving. It had a following. It had a wait list on weekends. A food writer had mentioned it in a column. The kitchen was running well. Darius came to Renee one evening with a folder. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, easy and warm, the way he could still be in those years, and pushed it across to her and suggested that since they were building something together, since they were a team in every sense of the word, it might make sense to restructure the business registration to reflect that reality. Both names. Equal partnership. The legal way of saying what's yours is ours. Renee had looked at the folder. She had looked at her husband. She had said she would think about it. She never signed. She did not refuse outright. She did not argue. She let time pass the way. You let something rest that you have decided about but are not ready to name. Darius dropped it after a few weeks, or appeared to. He came to the restaurant less frequently. He was on his phone more. There were evenings when he arrived home later than expected, with explanations that were technically complete, but somehow left a space at their edges. Small things accumulated the way small things do. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have held up in a conversation, but with the steadiness of water working on a surface over years. There was a Tuesday conference that a colleague later knew nothing about. A name, Simone. Appearing once in a text notification on his phone, face up on the kitchen counter, which he crossed the room and turned over calmly, as if it were an ordinary thing. The explanation was work. Renee said nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. And there was Tamara. Tamara had been her closest friend since they were both 22 and broke and figuring out what kind of women they were going to become. She had been at the restaurant opening with champagne and real tears. She knew everything. The quarterly numbers, the supplier relationships, the exact sum Renee had declined from an outside investor the previous spring because she was not willing to give majority control of something her grandmother had put into her hands in a recipe. Tamara came to dinner. She came to events. She sat in this kitchen many times and listened in the particular way that Renee had always taken for love. In a photograph from the opening night, taken from outside the front window before the doors opened to the public, Darius was visible near the entrance in conversation with a man in a gray suit. The man's name was Curtis. He was a financial advisor, Darius's financial advisor, a fact Renee had filed in the part of her mind reserved for information that does not yet demand examination. In the photograph, Curtis had leaned toward Darius and was saying something. Both men were looking at the building, not at the celebration visible through the window, at the structure, at the walls, at the thing itself. Renee had seen that photograph years later, looking for something else entirely in a shared folder, and had moved past it without stopping. She had learned early that some storms don't announce themselves. They just get quiet first. The divorce papers were in a gray folder inside a gym bag that had been sitting in the corner of the bedroom closet for 2 weeks. She had not been looking for them. She had been looking for his insurance card because he had asked her to find it that morning before. He left, and she had said she would. She found the folder behind the card, which was behind a small notebook, and she pulled it out, thinking it was something related to a dental appointment or a car registration, something ordinary. And then she sat down on the edge of the bed. The papers were thorough, 41 pages. They had been prepared by an attorney whose name she did not recognize, but the notarization on the cover page carried a name she knew. Curtis. The same man from the opening night photograph. The same gray suit, probably. The same careful, patient eyes that had looked at a building from the outside and decided what it was worth. The papers described Soulful as a marital asset subject to equitable division, not a sole proprietorship, not a business established 14 months before the marriage with her own savings and her grandmother's name behind it. A shared asset. The language was clean and precise and designed to make something that had been taken look like something that had been earned. She turned to the financial appendix. It was detailed in a way that stopped her. Quarterly revenue, projected valuations, supplier contract values, operational cost structures. Numbers that required access, not general access. Specific, detailed, current access to the restaurant's private financial records. Numbers that Darius could not have assembled on his own. She set the folder on the bed. She did not move for a while. Later that evening, she was searching her old emails for a vendor contract from 4 years back when she found a forwarded chain she had never been meant to see. It had been sent from Tamara's personal email to an address she did not recognize. She sat with that unknown address for 20 minutes, following it through a quiet and methodical sequence of steps, and arrived at Curtis. In the chain was a screenshot of a private conversation, her own words sent to Tamara in confidence 8 months prior, the exact quarterly revenue figure, word for word, number for number, sent from Tamara's phone to Curtis's account. Below that forward, in a separate exchange from 2 months earlier, was a photograph taken of a physical document. A supplier agreement. Renee's signature at the bottom. Clear. Clean. The proportions exact. Exactly the kind of signature a careful person with the right tools might use as a template for something else. Renee closed the laptop. She went to the kitchen. She filled the kettle. She set it on the burner and stood there watching it with both hands flat on the counter, watching the small light that told her it was working. She did not rush it. When the coffee was made, she sat at the table, with both hands wrapped around the cup, and looked at the wall for a long time. She did not call Tamara. She did not go to the bedroom. She thought. There was one thing in those papers that Darius had not counted on. One name. One signature. And Renee recognized exactly what it meant, even if nobody else did yet. She called Denise on a Monday morning and was in her office by Tuesday noon. Denise was a business attorney who worked out of a suite on the 11th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old leather. She was precise and economical, and had once told Renee, the first time they worked together on a vendor contract, that the strongest legal position is the one you build before you need it. Renee had been storing that sentence ever since. She arrived with a folder. Her own folder, the original articles of incorporation for Soulful, filed with the county clerk's office 14 months before her marriage to Darius. The founding loan documentation in her name only. 7 years of fiscal records for the business, clean, showing ownership, showing operation, showing not a single deposit from Darius or any account bearing his name. She placed them on Denise's desk in order and waited. Denise went through each document. She made notes in the margin of her legal pad. Small, careful notes in the shorthand she used when something mattered. She asked 3 questions. Then she set down her pen. The asset claim, she explained, rested on a single piece of evidence, a co-ownership authorization document carrying Renee's signature. Without that signature, the claim had no foundation. But the signature was there. It was reproduced from the supplier agreement photograph, and the reproduction was skilled. It would have held up against a casual challenge. It would not hold up against a forensic one. And there was a problem the person who built it had not accounted for. The supplier agreement being used as a template was dated 11 days after the authorization document it was copied into. The forger had used a document that, by the logic of the claim itself, should not have existed yet. Denise made one more note. They filed the legal separation of Soulful's operating accounts the following Thursday through a quiet administrative process that generated no notification to Darius or his attorney. Renee restructured the business entity in a way that removed every ambiguity the other side had been planning to exploit. She signed the paperwork in Denise's office, unhurried, her handwriting exactly what it had always been. Meanwhile, Darius was moving through that week unaware that the ground had shifted. He had been seen across town at a restaurant with Simone on Wednesday evening, relaxed in his chair, telling some story that made her laugh. He had texted Renee on Thursday that he would be late. She had said, okay. She had been at the bank. Tamara called on Friday, as she often did. They talked for 20 minutes. Renee asked about Tamara's sister, who had been dealing with something difficult at work. She listened. She expressed concern. She was warm and present in all the ways she had always been warm and present with Tamara, because those years of friendship had been real, even if what Tamara had done with them was not. She gave nothing away. On Saturday morning, she went to Soulful before service and sat in her back office for an hour, writing invitations by hand on heavy cream paper with a dark pen. 12 invitations, each one personal, each one warm. She named Darius's mother Beverly, a woman she genuinely respected, who deserved to know what her son had become. She named 2 couples who had been woven into the fabric of the marriage since nearly the beginning. She named Curtis, noting only that Darius had always spoken so highly of him and that she wanted the chance to extend the courtesy herself. She named Tamara. She named Denise, describing her as an old friend she had been meaning to properly introduce to the people in her life. She delivered each invitation herself, drove to doors and handed them over. She was gracious and unhurried, and gave each person the impression of someone looking forward to an evening. She didn't plan a fight. She planned a dinner. And there is nothing more dangerous than a woman who knows exactly who is coming to her table. On the Wednesday before the dinner, Darius came by the restaurant in the middle of the afternoon. He did this periodically, arrived without notice during the quiet hours between service, moved through the space with his hands in his pockets, exchanged pleasantries with staff, sat at the bar for a glass of water. He had done it for years. Renee had long understood it for what it was, not support, not interest in the restaurant's daily life, but a kind of periodic assertion, a reminder that he was present, that he had a relationship to this space, whether the space acknowledged it or not. He came in through the front around 2 o'clock. The dining room was in the middle of being reset. A server named Deja was folding napkins at a corner table, her hands moving in the automatic rhythm of someone who has done the same task so many times, it has become its own small meditation. From the kitchen came the sound of a knife on a board, steady and patient. The room felt different. He noticed it within 30 seconds and could not locate the source. The staff greeted him exactly as they always did, warmly, professionally, without anything extra. But the quality of the greeting had shifted in some way he could not name. It was as if everyone in the room knew exactly where they stood, and he was the only one still trying to find his footing. He found Renee in the back office. She was at her desk with her reading glasses on, a coffee at her elbow, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She took the glasses off. She smiled and offered him coffee. He sat across from her. He watched her. He had always been able to read her. The faint tension at the corners of her eyes when something was bothering her, the particular set of her shoulders when she was managing something internally, the almost imperceptible change in her voice when she was choosing her words more carefully than usual. He found none of it. She talked about the dinner on Thursday, said the menu looked good, that the kitchen was doing something special with the first course, that she was genuinely looking forward to having everyone together. She asked if Beverly was still coming. She asked this the way someone asks a simple question, without layers. He said yes. He left 20 minutes later. He sat in the parking lot for a moment before starting the car, not quite ready to move, trying to identify what the conversation had left behind. It was the feeling of having held something in his hands that appeared to weigh a certain amount, and finding, when he put it down, that the table did not register the same weight he expected. He called Curtis from the road. He said to move faster on the filing. Curtis said he was working on it. He said work faster. Curtis said he understood. That evening, Tamara called Renee to say she was so looking forward to Thursday that could she bring anything, that she had been thinking about Renee so much lately and just wanted her to feel loved. Renee said, "Just come, just bring yourself, that's more than enough." And she meant it in the precise, complicated way that people mean things when the meaning has more than one layer. The night before the dinner, Renee went to Soulful alone. She let herself in with her key and did not turn on the overhead lights, only the low amber lights above the bar that stayed on a timer and turned the room into something half asleep. She walked through the dining room slowly. She let her hand trail along the back of a chair. She looked at the tables set for tomorrow, the folded napkins, the small candle holders her kitchen manager had sourced from a woman in the neighborhood who made them by hand from reclaimed glass. The room was everything she had imagined it would be when she had been 22 and drawing tables in a spiral notebook. She stopped at the host stand. The recipe card was there. It had been there every day for 7 years, pinned to the wooden frame with a single thumbtack, slightly worn at the corners, the handwriting still fully legible. Viola's writing. Big, looping, unhurried letters, the handwriting of a woman who had learned to write before anyone had an opinion about how it should look, and who had carried that original style through 81 years without modifying it once. Renee stood there for a long time, not doing anything, just being in the room she had built. The night before the morning when everything would be laid out on a table for everyone to see. The room already knew. The walls knew. The kitchen knew. The only people who didn't know were the ones who had spent years believing she was too soft to fight back. The dinner began at 7. The lighting was warm and low, the kind of light that makes people lean closer and speak more honestly than they plan to. The music was what Viola had played on Sunday afternoons, something between soul and gospel that asked nothing of the listener except to be present. Renee had been in the kitchen for an hour before the first guest arrived, not working frantically, not directing, tasting, adjusting, making sure. The first course had been built around one of Viola's original dishes, expanded and refined through 7 years of Renee's own hands and thinking, but with its bones fully intact. She tasted it twice. She adjusted one element. She wiped the edge of a plate that had not needed wiping. Then she went to the dining room. Beverly arrived first. She was a composed woman in her late 60s, with a quality of stillness about her that Renee had always respected. The stillness of someone who has survived difficult things without allowing them to become her identity. She hugged Renee at the door. She held it a beat longer than social necessity required. She looked at the dining room and said it was beautiful, and she meant it the way someone means something when they have no reason not to. The other guests arrived in the following 15 minutes. The two couples, old friends of the marriage, comfortable and warm and glad to be there. Denise, who arrived alone and was introduced simply and without ceremony, as a friend Renee had been meaning to properly bring into the room. Darius arrived with Tamara. They came in together, talking, laughing at something, a natural ease between them that now read as what it had always been. Darius was in a dark blazer. He was relaxed in the particular way a man is relaxed when he believes the outcome of an evening is already settled. He greeted Beverly warmly, kissed her cheek, looked around the table with the quiet satisfaction of a man who thinks he understands the gathering he has walked into. He noticed Denise, took her in briefly, and moved on without concern. Curtis arrived last. He was in a gray suit. The first course was served, and the table went quiet, eating it in the way people go quiet when food touches something that is not really about food. Someone said, "Renee, what is this?" She said, "It was my grandmother's." The table returned to their plates. The conversation that followed was warm and wandering, the kind that moves between topics without any of the participants needing to steer it. Darius was in good form, telling a story that required his hands, making the table laugh. Tamara was attentive, engaged, turning her warmth in Renee's direction at regular intervals. Beverly was quiet in a way that was listening rather than absence. Curtis ate carefully and said little. Midway through the second course, Renee set down her fork. She set it down quietly, the way you set something down when you are finished with it. She pushed her chair back. She stood. The table stilled. She thanked everyone for coming. She said she had gathered the people most present in her life over the last several years because she believed that clarity, real clarity, the kind that lets people see each other honestly, was worth a good meal and a Tuesday evening. She said she wanted to tell a story. Her voice was even and unhurried and exactly itself. She placed a folder on the table and opened it. She turned the first page toward the center of the table. The original articles of incorporation for Soulful, dated 14 months before her marriage to Darius, naming her as the sole owner of the business. She read the filing date aloud. She named the loan amount and the bank and the account, all of it in her name alone. She turned the second page. The 7 years of operating records. The financial history of the restaurant showing in clean numbers that Darius had never contributed $1 to the restaurant's operations, had, in fact, made personal withdrawals from their joint accounts during 2 fiscal years that coincided with periods when Soulful had carried its own expenses and his both. She said, "Someone has recently filed paperwork attempting to claim this restaurant as a shared marital asset, subject to division in a divorce proceeding." She said it with no more heat than if she were describing a weather system that had passed. She placed the third document on the table. The asset claim, the signature at the bottom. She said, "This is not my signature." The room held that statement. She slid the document toward Curtis. His eyes went to it and then away. The practiced movement of a man deciding what a face should be doing. He moved them back. His jaw shifted slightly. A small, contained adjustment that said more than he intended. The signature had been reproduced from a supplier agreement, a copy photographed and forwarded to Curtis by Tamara 8 months before the filing, a document Renee had found in an email chain she was never meant to see. The reproduction was skilled. It was exact in proportion, even in the pressure of the strokes. But the person who built it had made one error. They had used a supplier agreement dated 11 days after the authorization document the signature appeared on. The template had come into existence after the thing it was supposedly authorizing. Denise placed 2 sets of documents on the table simultaneously. One in front of Curtis, one in front of Darius. Legal notices. Fraudulent document preparation. Knowing participation in an attempt to fraudulently claim a privately held business asset through forged authorization. Curtis stared at the page in front of him. Darius's hand was flat on the tablecloth. Completely flat. All the ease had left his posture between one breath and the next, and what remained was something smaller. Tamara had gone entirely still in her chair. She was looking at the center of the table at a fixed point that was not any particular object. Beverly was looking at her son, not in anger, in something older and more complete, something that had been waiting to understand a thing for a long time, and was now understanding it, and finding it was exactly as heavy as she had feared. Renee reached to her right. She picked up the laminated recipe card that she had taken from the host stand that afternoon and brought with her to the table. Not as evidence, not as a document, as a presence. She placed it gently in the center of the table, among the legal papers, on the white tablecloth in the warm light. She said, "My grandmother wrote that before she ever had a stove worth cooking on. Everything in this building, every table, every plate, every recipe, every year of it, came from her hands and from mine. Nobody is taking it." Darius opened his mouth. She looked at him once. One look, steady, complete, and entirely at peace. He closed it. The room held the silence the way a room holds something true, not with discomfort, but with recognition. There was no shouting, no glass broken, no voice raised. Just the sound of a woman who had built something real, standing at the head of a table full of people who had variously loved her, used her, or both, and not one of them finding a single word to say. The following weeks arranged themselves with a kind of inevitability that Renee had anticipated, but still found slightly startling to watch in motion. Curtis retained his own attorney before the end of the week. The forensic document examination confirmed the timeline error within 10 days. The signature on the asset claim had been sourced from a document that post-dated the claim by 11 days, and the chain of digital evidence leading from the original photograph through Tamara's forwarded email to Curtis's account was intact and legible. The divorce filing collapsed entirely before it reached a courtroom. Darius walked away from the marriage with what he had brought into it. It was not very much. The fraud investigation into Curtis extended in directions that had nothing to do with Renee. He had been careful in the ways people are careful when they think they will never be examined directly, and completely careless in the ways people are careless when they have gone unexamined long enough to believe they never will be. There were 3 other clients. There were business records that stretched back 9 years. He did not resolve it quickly or quietly, and the resolution, when it came, was not in his favor. Simone had been told several things about the situation that were not accurate. She had been told the marriage was functionally over, that there were substantial assets coming, that Darius was a man of significant means who happened to be finishing a complicated transition. She learned the shape of her situation gradually, and then, with sudden completeness, the way you learn you have been standing in the wrong room when someone turns on the lights. She did not create a scene. She simply stopped being present in his life. First the calls unanswered, then the appearances stopped, then the absence became permanent, in the thorough way that absences become permanent, when there is nothing left to wait for. What happened with Tamara happened more slowly, and in some ways left a larger mark. There was no legal consequence. She had been a conduit, a carrier of information she had chosen to carry, and what she had done lived in that difficult space between betrayal and crime that the law often declines to enter. But the social consequence was complete and unhurried. Their shared community learned the shape of what had happened the way communities learn things, not through announcements but through the slow redistribution of understanding, person to person, context to context, conversation to conversation. Friendships that had included Tamara found reasons to thin. The catering arrangement she had held with Soulful for 2 years was not renewed when its term ended. Renee signed the non-renewal on a Tuesday afternoon without ceremony and did not revisit it. Beverly called once. A Sunday afternoon. Renee was in the kitchen when the phone lit up. She looked at it. She thought about Beverly, her stillness, the way she had looked at her son across a candle-lit table in that moment of clear and irreversible understanding. She felt something for her that was not quite forgiveness and not quite grief, but lived near both of them. She turned the phone face down. She went back to what she was doing. She did not think about Darius often. When she did, she found less heat in it than she had expected. He had made the oldest error a certain kind of man makes about a certain kind of woman. He had mistaken her steadiness for passivity. He had believed that because she built quietly, she could be taken from quietly. He had looked at 7 years of calm and seen softness when he should have seen architecture. He thought taking her restaurant would make him something. But a man who builds his life on someone else's foundation, the fall is always the same, loud, and entirely his own fault. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Renee arrived at Soulful before anyone else. She let herself in through the back door the way she always did on mornings like this, her key in the lock, the door swinging open to the cold dark of the kitchen before the day had claimed it. The kitchen at that hour had a particular quality she had come to love over the years. Everything in its place, every surface bare and clean and waiting, the smell of potential rather than product. She moved to the small personal coffee station she had set up near the pass-through 7 years ago, on the principle that there are mornings that must be entered with coffee already in hand, and she made a cup and carried it into the dining room. The morning light was coming in through the front windows at a low angle, the particular angle of early spring light that moves slowly enough to watch. It laid itself across the floor in long, unhurried strips and shifted almost imperceptibly as she stood there. The chairs were still upturned on the tables from the night crew's cleaning. The room was completely quiet. She had it entirely to herself for the few minutes before the world arrived. She walked to the host stand. The recipe card was there. It looked different now. She had taken it to a small preservation shop on Clement Street 2 weeks after the dinner, had it set properly in a thin glass frame with archival backing that would hold the paper stable and legible for another 50 years without fading or yellowing. It was mounted now on a small bracket on the wall just to the left of the stand, not pinned anymore, not held by a single thumbtack in the way something is held when it is precarious. Just there, properly kept, the way something important should be. She looked at the writing for a moment. The loops, the particular way Viola had formed the letter R. A 2-stroke motion, forward and decisive, unchanged from the first time she had learned it to the last time she used it. The recipe itself was for a chicken stew she had made every November, the one that had required the recipe card to exist in the first place because Renee had asked her grandmother to write it down before it was lost. It had not been lost. From the back came the sound of the alley door opening. Footsteps. The refrigerator. Then the first knife finding its board in the steady, patient rhythm that meant the day had begun. Renee called back a greeting. A voice answered. The kitchen started becoming itself. By noon, every table was occupied. She moved through the dining room the way she had always moved through it. Without hurry, with attention, stopping where she was needed and giving passage to the tables that were finding their own rhythm. She knew the sound of the room. She knew which lull meant the kitchen was right on time and which one meant someone needed to move. She knew the particular quality of a table that was having a genuinely good time versus one that was performing it. She had built this knowledge over 7 years of daily presence, the same way her grandmother had built her knowledge of cooking, not through theory, but through standing in the room and paying attention until the room told you what it needed. At 12:15, she stopped near the kitchen pass. She rested one hand on the smooth edge of the counter, its surface worn to a particular finish by years of plates passing over it. The dining room opened in front of her. Every table full, the sound of conversation layered over the sound of silverware over the low music, all of it filling the space that had started in a spiral notebook and a recipe card and $4,000 and a belief that something made with your own hands was worth making. She stood there for a long moment, still, both feet on the ground, completely at home in the thing she had built. She never needed him to fail. She only needed herself to stand, and that is always enough. If this story reminded you that what you build with your own hands cannot be taken, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. And if you want more stories about women who stayed quiet, stayed ready, and stayed standing, you already know where to find them.